Okay, well, my name is Luitzen Bijlsma, and I would like to talk to you about disaster risk reduction, as it is a small program for 2 years now in The Hague to assist other countries to give advice on how to reduce the risk of natural disasters, and especially water disasters. So I'm an independent advisor and I'm retired after a multi-year experience in water construction, water management, flood management in the Netherlands as well as abroad. And since the beginning, 2 years ago, member of the disaster risk reduction program and the team in The Hague, and as a team leader. And my story is based on my own experiences without charge or consultation, or in Dutch, zonder last of ruggespraak. I have a lot of information and I would like to go through it with high speed, so fasten your seatbelts. I can push these buttons, I think, yeah? Okay, my introduction includes the following items. First, I would like to introduce to you a kind of a conceptual model of disaster risk reduction. Secondly, I would like to test this model on the latest flood in the Netherlands. Well, this flood probably most of you don't remember. It's 20 or 22 years ago. Serious floods along the River Meuse. So if we have a model, we should first test it in our own home base, I think. So, and then at the third place, what is a disaster risk reduction team, the program, and where does it act? And then I have two examples I was involved in myself. One is a serious flood in China, and one recently in Albania. Well, after this, I would like to have more a kind of a global picture. Where are the disasters globally, and the water disasters? And is a DRR, disaster risk reduction team, is it well connected to these disasters? Then I would like to make, number 6, some remarks on climate change. Do we experience climate change in damage figures, etc.? And, well, being one of the objectives of the DRR program to stimulate also the water export, the water knowledge from the Netherlands abroad, well, I also would like to try to answer the question, does subsidy programs like this one help to stimulate the water exports from the Netherlands? And finally, that's number 8, I would like to wrap up with some conclusions. Okay, let's start with the conceptual model of disaster risk reduction. It is two sides of a coin. One side is prevention, and the other side is recovery. And we have just heard an introduction of Matthijs van Ledden on recovery. Once the disaster happens, first you need to recover people, houses, infrastructure. But there is more to say about this, because we're talking about natural hazards, and well, you can never reduce the risk to 0. So if we talk about recovery and prevention, then you're never done. The risk is never 0, so it can always happen a disaster again. And therefore it is kind of a cyclic process given in this diagram. And if you run through this cyclic process, it starts always with a disaster, as we just have seen in the case of Serbia. We have a disaster, and when the disaster is there, we need an impact assessment, we need emergency measures, we need recovery measures, so that society can move on again. Well, when we follow this circle, then we have also reconstruction, so maybe a lot of damage in infrastructure and housing, and so we need a lot of reconstruction efforts. But then we are not done, because there is after the disaster is the cry, this should never happen again. Something has to be done. Then you need to develop a plan for the longer term. How can we prevent the impact of natural disasters on the longer run? If you have a plan, you should realize this plan. So that may be a lot of work, building embankments, making room for the river, whatever. It's not only structural engineering, it's also non-structural, because maybe people are investing on the wrong places, starting to live on the wrong places. So it can also include land use planning, legislation, you need regulation to enforce. And finally, when all that plan is implemented, you need to maintain it. Very, very important to take that in mind, because maintenance of infrastructure is in many cases a big problem. Enforcement of regulation is a big problem. People tend to move towards flood-prone areas. And early warning, a system for early warning should be in place and should work. Well, this circle is not complete, but no, it is complete because it takes quite a long time after a disaster to go through this circle. And what easily can happen is kind of apathy. Well, it's a long time ago, it's 2 years ago, so it will not happen again. So we do not need all those expensive measures and all that enforcement. So then things are slipping away and the structural plan is not going to happen. Okay, this is kind of a conceptual model that I would like. Well, first of all, we can say what is disaster risk reduction team is more on the left side of this circle, starting with reconstruction measures and combining that with plan development for structural measures for the longer term. So that is the position of the disaster risk reduction team in this circle. Well, I then would like to test this model a little bit on a Dutch case, the latest flood we have experienced in the Netherlands. So there were 2 floodings, one in a 50-year, one in a 100-year event, so quite serious. One in 1993 and one in 1995. And probably most of you don't remember these serious floods. Well, the flood in December 1993, 12,000 people were evacuated in the Meuse Valley. There was a lot of cattle drowned, and 8% of the province of Limburg was underwater. And there was 250 million guilders damage. So we didn't have a euro at the time. 250 million guilders damage. And well, it can happen. 2 years later, there was again a serious flood. 200,000 people had to be evacuated because it was also a threat along the River Rhine. And there was 200 million guilders damage. So we are talking about serious things 22 years ago. Well, let's start to test this circle against these experiences in the Netherlands. We had a flooding of the Meuse Valley in 1993. There was a lot of outcry from local people in the media, also in the parliament. Something had to be done, government. So mostly in these cases, government is installing a committee, and you can say, well, this is a kind of a disaster risk reduction advisory team, a committee. It was called Committee Boertien. And they started a little less than a year after this serious flood in January 1994, and they were ready in December 1994. So they, little less than a year, they made their studies on reconstruction and plan development for structural solutions along one of these rivers in the Netherlands. So we are almost 2 years after this flood, so there is the threat of impending apathy. Why should we do this very expensive project? But a new flood was happening 1995. So there was no time for impending apathy. And again, a huge outcry in the media and also in the parliament. Government, you have to act. And then the government adopted the Delta Plan for the main rivers in the Netherlands. Still in in execution, almost done, as we have heard from Matthijs van Ledden of one of the projects near Nijmegen. So you can say never waste a good crisis, or in Dutch, geen beter beleid dan een calamiteit. So there was no time for impending apathy here. So this is how it works in reality, in practice. Well, we can have a brief look at the advice of this committee. It was combining reconstruction and, let's say, plan development for structural solutions. And the reconstruction was about building emergency embankments. Should be done something immediately. And there was also, and everything was possible on that moment because the government had to act, an emergency law for urgent works. When you want to replace a cubic meter of soil or want to change the destination of a square meter in a floodplain, you needed at the time 15 licenses. So large-scale works was nearly impossible to implement in the Netherlands. But there was an emergency law with a waiver, one decision and one appeal for all those 15 licenses. So that was a great help to implement this project. So that was a very big help in reconstruction, and in plan development, room for the river was born. For the Meuse it was sand and gravel mining combining with nature development. And sand and gravel mining is also kind of a financial engine, because it has a value. You can sell it, and through this sand and gravel mining you also can finance this disaster risk reduction scheme. So it was also kind of a public-private partnership. And on the second place, non-structural measures strengthening the land use planning of the floodplain, including, of course, enforcement. No investment in flood-prone areas anymore. Well, we can have a quick look at the realization of this plan. The emergency embankments, they were ready within 5 years. Now 80%, there's always a little bit to do, but they have been implemented relatively quite quickly after the floods. And the structural measures, the longer-term plan, the planning for the Sand Meuse, the northern part of the Meuse, was ready in 2003. And you can see the implementation is almost ready this year. It should be ready this year, but there is some delay. But you can see how long it takes to have all those 40 projects, this scheme, to have them implemented. And for the border Meuse, that is the border between Belgium and the Netherlands, the plan was ready in 2005, and the realization will be ready in somewhere in 2021, maybe somewhat later, because this is heavily financed through sand and gravel mining, and we had our economic crisis, so the building industry had a decline, so also the sand and gravel mining had a decline. Well, we can take some lessons from this Netherlands case before we go abroad and preaching, let's say, disaster risk reduction measures. If you focus on the longer term, then it's becoming very complex, because these schemes, it's not a point infrastructure, it's not line infrastructure like a railroad, it is more a surface type of infrastructure, a river, including the floodplain, so it's complex, and you have to deal with multifaceted. It takes a long time for implementation. In the United States, they did it in New Orleans in 6 years, but in the Netherlands it takes 20 years. In 20 years' time, society is changing, so you need a robust, adaptive plan. You need to accept that you may have to change the plan during implementation. Well, river infrastructure and building in the floodplain has a huge impact on the environment, and therefore the discussion in the society never stops. So also here you need to be responsive and adaptive to the needs in a society and to the needs for local development. You have to look for financial engines. Everything is from the taxpayers' money, from the national budget. Well, there are a lot of competing priorities in the national budget. So if you have, let's say, other financial engines, like in this case sand and gravel mining, can also be local development, that helps. You need to have a look at the legal basis and the regulations before starting large-scale works. Is it doable? Can it be done? What are the risks in the legal basis? And never forget, I think, it's my experience, never forget that what you are building should become in operation. It should be maintained. So always have kind of a life cycle approach in the design. Okay, so far, let's say the Netherlands case, the latest flood in the Netherlands. So let's now have a look at this subsidy program where small teams can go to abroad to assist countries in developing. The war is coming. So to assist countries and to give them advice on reconstruction and plan development for the longer term to avoid impact of natural disasters. So the objective is this advice, but the objective is also to bring the Dutch water sector, public as well as private, in a position to follow up with that advice with all kinds of delivery and services that could be exported to elsewhere. The program has a limited budget. 80% of the budget is public, 20% is private, so companies involved also have to reduce their tariffs. It has a limited duration. It should be based on the request of the country through the embassy. All countries can apply, so it's not about the developing countries. It can also be in Western Europe, it can be in Africa, it doesn't matter. And there is not a long procedure to come to a decision to assist, so it could be done in a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Well, it's about water disasters, and these are the cases on the map where this program has acted so far. You can see it's widespread over the globe. Latin America, Africa, quite a number in Europe, in the Balkans, in Asia. Blue is floods, so the majority is a flood disaster, 14. 2 are focusing on drought, it's also a disaster, and 1 on more an environmental type of a disaster, in this case a coastal erosion problem in Senegal. I have 2 cases I was involved in myself. I would quickly go through these 2 cases and then go to the global picture. One was in China, in Zhejiang province. You have here a map of Zhejiang province, and Zhejiang province is 3 times the Netherlands. It has 55 million inhabitants, so it's dense populated. It has a mountainous inland, and a very low-lying flat coastal zone where the majority of the people live these days. Zhejiang is regularly visited by typhoons, and it's suffering then high wind speed, but it's not only the wind speed, it is more the rainfall that is creating problems. The rain is falling in the mountains, huge amounts, incredible amounts, and they are running downhill fast in the coastal plain, and there you have waterlogging and flooding. And also there are many rivers running from the mountains through the sea, but these rivers that's the natural drainage capacity of the province, so to speak. But this drainage capacity is not well maintained, not enforced. So if you look at the cyclones, so we take the tracks of the cyclones over the globe for the past, 50, 55 years, 60 years or so. You can see there is a concentration, that's the wrong button, this one, in the western part of the Pacific, or in East Asia, and there is a concentration here in the eastern part of the Pacific, close to Mexico. And well, recently we had Patricia in Mexico. You remember that was a hurricane that was called to be hurricane scale number 6. That even didn't exist, but in reality the impact was not so serious as forecasted. Well, one of the hurricanes that that grew in the eastern Pacific was Vito. The name was Vito, and this is the track record of Vito, straight into the province of Zhejiang. And well, this is a picture of one of the towns. There are many of these towns in the coastal plain, and you have to imagine 30 years ago there was maybe only a few villages here. Now we have Wenling city, 1 million inhabitants, and there are many of these towns in the coastal flat, and that's creating a lot of problems. Now, the location of Wenling city, as an example, is here, and the water is running down hills, and maybe the city here is maybe a few meters above sea level, and this is the Gang River, the natural drainage. And as in the next picture you will see that the capacity of this river is reduced considerable. There were serious problems of flooding in Wenling city. The proposed solution by the Chinese was to drill tunnels through the hills here and here to the ocean in the west and in the south. And because of the low elevation of the area of Wenling city, you need big pumping stations to pump the water through these tunnels to the ocean. And the capacity of the pumping stations was, let's say, 200 cubic meters a second, so that is enormous. That is comparable with the biggest pumping stations in the Netherlands. So, very expensive infrastructural solution here in China. And so we had a discussion with the local people of Zhejiang province, and well, first we have a look at Gang River. Well, you can see that it is heavily modified. You see a lot of harbor development in the river. You see a lot of construction in the floodplain. So you can imagine that the discharge capacity, the drainage capacity of this river has been reduced considerably. Well, the advice to the authorities of Zhejiang were the following. Have a look at cost benefit, because you're implementing very expensive infrastructure, and so you should have a cost benefit analysis, damage versus the investment. Also, to such an economic analysis, to have a better underpinning of the flood protection standards that you need in the whole coastal area of Zhejiang, and maybe even in the coastal areas of China. The second advice was have a better valuation of the natural drainage capacity of the rivers, and evaluate river management, maintenance and enforcement. So that is really a point that is, I think, coming back everywhere in the world. And as opportunities for the Netherlands water sector were seen, flood early warning, risk assessment, infrastructure, operations tools, like decision support systems. So that was the way of thinking that the Netherlands could deliver services and equipment to China. Let's then have a quick look at the second case, that is Albania. That was, the floods were earlier this year, and the DRR team started in September. Well, we have Albania. Oh, sorry, I have to go back. Albania, it's a little smaller than the Netherlands. It has high mountains in the east, rising up to 3,000 meters, so that is high mountains. It has 6 river basins indicated here in different colors on the map. The most interesting river basin is in the north. It's called the Drin-Bruna River Basin. Albania is suffering when you have the western winds over the Mediterranean, heavy rainfall in the mountains, and the pathway to the coast is only a couple of hours, so it can happen very quickly in Albania. The infrastructure is developed in communist time, and the infrastructure is crumbling. It's not well maintained. So in 1990, Albania was the latest country to remove from communist regime and was liberated, so to speak. But also people tended to move abroad, tended to move to the private sector, so the capacity of the authorities is weak. But also, once they were liberated, people were forced to live in the mountains, were no longer forced to live in the mountains, to work in the mines, and moved towards the coastal plain. Massive movement from the mountains through the coastal plain. And many illegal settlements were built in flood-prone areas. So you can see in short notice of time, a lot of problems can arise. Albania is also candidate EU member and dedicated to a reform process. They are working very hard to reform their institutions, to have better services on water management and flood services to the people. This is the Drin-Bruna River Basin in the north, and you can see that this was a flood a couple of years ago. The Drin River is seriously out of its embankments. A lot of villages and houses were drowned. But also, the Bruna River, that is going through the biggest freshwater lake of the Balkan, the Bruna River is also blocked by the high water stages in the Drin River. So the Skodra Lake is rising and rising and rising and is flooding. This is Skodra town, well, almost half of Skodra town. So this is, in short, the types of problems we have in Albania. The Bruna River, that is here. They built a bridge recently, and you can see that this bridge is hydraulically a bad design. It is more blocking the current than guiding the current through the bridge. And also what you can see is that one of the first section, the first opening of this bridge is blocked by an outcrop, by a terrace that was developed by a restaurant on the shore. So here we have enforcement problems. How can we enforce the capacity of the Brun River? Okay, in the case of Albania, the DRR team came forward with the following advice. They were on the track with a reform process, and we made quite some recommendations to support and strengthen this reform process, to have a better government to provide water services. The institutional and legal arrangements that should be made in place for water resources management and water services, and also for flood protection. Given the low capacity of the government in Albania, invest in the knowledge base, capacity building, training in country, and new staff for the public water services was very needed. And there were seen opportunities for the Netherlands water sector: flood early warning, risk mapping, design of and standards for infrastructure, equipment, replacement of pumps. There was very old equipment, the pumping stations in the coast. Some polder areas were even below sea level. The pumping stations were equipped with pumps 50 years old, made in Bulgaria. Okay, this gives you an idea about the DRR, tested in the Netherlands and implemented in 2 cases in abroad. Now, if there is some time left, I would like to go to more a global picture. And so you can ask the question, where are the natural disasters? And what is the disaster risk reduction market? And then you can find a lot of information with the reinsurance companies, like for instance Munich, based in Munich. And they provide information on the natural disasters on a global scale. For instance, this map of 2013. Well, you can see hydrological events that is indicated in blue. Maybe it's not so visible, but there are a lot of blue spots, floods, but there are also a lot of green spots, meteorological events. And if you look, for instance, at Vito, that was in 2013, the problem was more the flooding than the wind speed, so the green spots are also blue spots. So the majority of natural events are floods. That is, there are also many droughts indicated in orange, and of course in red, earthquakes, also a natural disaster. Well, you can then ask the question, are the number of these events increasing? And they do. We have here a record of 35 years, starting in 1918. Well, you can see that the number of natural disasters is increasing to almost 1,000 a year today. Well, also here the colors again, and you can also see that if we take the hydrological events, the floods and the meteorological events together, the majority is flood. So we can say that there is every day there is a flood on the globe somewhere. Every day. It's not all in the newspaper, some are in the newspaper, but so we have a flood every day. That's an interesting figure. It seems that things are increasing, but you have to take in mind that in these 30, 35 years, also the global population has increased from 3 to more than 7 billion. So the increase in the number of loss events can be explained from global growth. So it's not climate change, it can be explained from global growth. It speaks even more if you look at the damage. So we have here the damage in billion US dollars. So 300, 200 billion US dollars a year. And also the record from 1980 to 2013, 2014, I believe. Also here a growth of a factor 3 in 35 years. And these pictures always show up as an indicator for climate change. But you have to take also here in mind that the world gross product, if we take that example, an indicator for the global economy, is today 4 to 5 times higher than 35 years ago. So also you have to take in mind that people tend to move towards flood-prone areas like coastal zones, like floodplains along the rivers, as we have seen in China, as we have seen in Albania. So, in fact, the expectation then would be that the losses would have grown with much more than a factor of 5. Maybe exponential somewhere here. And they didn't. So that this is surprising. So my conclusion is, also if there is climate change in these figures, and there will be climate change in these figures, the results of prevention measures, that is my conclusion, are prevailing climate change. So what we see is that in the developing world, the need for prevention is growing and the investment in prevention is growing. So that's why these figures are not going as exponential as you would expect them to go. So that is a surprising conclusion. And I think with increasing global warming, however, the impact of climate change may lead to growing losses worldwide if prevention cannot keep pace. So there will be in the future kind of a rat race, I think, between the impact of climate change and the results of prevention. Well, next slide is about how many hurricanes do we have each year. So here we have 10, 8, 12. So on average we have 6 hurricanes a year. This is a graph from the Meteorological Institute in the Netherlands. It has a record from 1818 until now, so it's more than 100 years. So there is not, I think, an increase of the number of hurricanes. It seems to be quite stable in the past 130 years. However, there are reports that indicate that the number of Category 5 hurricanes is increasing somewhat. So we also can have a look at sea level rise. If we work in coastal areas like in Zhejiang in China or in the Netherlands or in Albania, sea level rise is an important factor. Long tide gauge series like here in Den Helder, the north in the Netherlands, show a relative sea level rise of about 20 centimeters a century. And laser altimeters that are satellite borne and measuring the surface of the ocean, and they do that since 15 years, are measuring ocean level rise of 30 centimeters a century. So this is the global picture, and this 15 years here, the red, maybe you can see it, is the result of the laser altimeter in the satellites. And they indicate 30 centimeters a century. So there could be an acceleration, and that is quite scaring, I think, in my opinion. But for Den Helder, we do not see acceleration in the measurements so much. You have to take in mind, and that is this diagram here, that subsidence as a result of groundwater subtraction is in many coastal towns a dominant factor, much more dominant than sea level rise. For instance, the green line here is Tokyo. This is a subsidence of 4 meters. The measurements start in 1900. So Tokyo has pumped itself down with 4 meters. And as you can see here, Jakarta is also on the way to equalize the record of Tokyo, and same for other big coastal towns in the world. So you also can see that in Tokyo they have managed to stop it, and so it can be done. It can be done, but the red line here is sea level rise, so you can see in many cases subsidence is dominant to sea level rise. Okay, let's then, I'm coming to my closure, but not yet. Let's then have a look at the answer on the question, does subsidy programs like DRR team, disaster risk reduction team, to help a little bit other countries, does these programs help to stimulate the export of water technology from the Netherlands? And there we have the WEX, the Water Sector Export Index, that is developed by Pantea, an economic consultancy, and the Netherlands Water Partnership. And the WEX differentiates between delta technology, so equipment on delta technology, and water technology. And delta technology is indicated here in orange, and I think water technology in blue. And it's more or less the similar graph, and you can see the year 2000 here is 100%. So, and we are now today, we are not yet 200%, but we are nearing 200%. So you can say, since 2000, the water export, so to speak, the technology and advice and services, etc., to abroad have increased with more than 75%. And it's right on its way to double. And by itself, this is a good result, I would say. Eh? Congratulations. However, we can, for instance, have a look at the export quote. And export quote is the share of the export of the total water turnover. So if the total water turnover is 100%, for instance, you can see orange is delta technology. For delta technology, let's say almost 50% is export and 50% is domestic market of the 100%. And for water technology, well, the domestic market is even more dominant. Export is 30, it's growing a little bit to 40%. So 60 to 70% is domestic market. Well, if you then move to the next, the WEX, the water export share, then you can see it's only a small share of the total export in the Netherlands. It's around 1.7, 1.8% of the total export in the Netherlands. And you can see that the share is declining a little bit. So my conclusion is that the water export is lagging somewhat behind with the general exports in the Netherlands. And well, I think it's also because it is the water sector, the home market is more dominant than the external market, and home market is very much public services dominated and is therefore rather traditional. So here I think there is work to do and a world to win, and a challenge, I think, for the top sector, knowledge top sector, water in the Netherlands, to find the trigger to rebound this curve and to boost the water exports from the Netherlands. Also good for you, for your future, I think. And I think a jump is needed, and that the top sector water didn't find the right trigger yet. Well, 2 slides to go. Where is the water export going to from the Netherlands? Could be equipment, could be advice. And then you can see that half of it is going to Europe, EU members, but also the rest of Europe. A big portion, quite a big portion, is going to Asia, Latin America. Probably this is North America and this is Latin America. May have made a mistake, whatever. But the biggest market is the European market. So in my opinion, we should have much more focus on the European market. How can we maintain our market share in Europe? That should be the big question, I think. And what innovations are needed to do so. I'm coming to my final remarks. Try to wrap up a little bit. I hope it's not too much, this data and information. The first is, I think we have to go back 20 years to find a Dutch DRR case example in the Netherlands. The latest flood in the Netherlands 22 years ago. A lot of people have forgotten about it, and maybe you don't even remember it because you were maybe small, maybe at the time. Well, there is a facility in The Hague that is called DRR, Disaster Risk Reduction Program, and this facility is, I think, quite well connected to the global water disasters. Not so much to droughts, but certainly to floods. The number of natural disasters and the damage is increasing on a global scale, and more than half of it is related to flood as a natural disaster. Climate change till now plays a secondary role, in my opinion, and its impact is surpassed through demographic factors like moving to the coast, development in the coast, land use, and also, I think, preventive measures. It should be there. Preventive measures are undertaken everywhere in the world. The damage of flooding is growing slower than the world product, so to speak, indicating that results of prevention have impact and that the prevention market is a growing market. It's also called adaptation in climate change terminology. The Netherlands' water export is lagging behind general export numbers from the Netherlands, and here action is needed to maintain our share, especially in Europe, and that is my opinion and my final conclusion. Thank you.